Hello, welcome once again to Urban X-Files. My name is Keith, and today's very strange story was relayed to me by a priest. This priest we shall refer to as the bishop. And when a man of the church, a man who's dedicated his life to serving God, a wise man, tells you a story, the story is more believable. And the account of this bishop's personal experience is something he had to question his mind and his faith over. Sometime in the 1980s, the bishop was finally ordained. He took over as a priest of a church near Clitheroe in Lancashire, very close to the famous Pendle Hill, the site of Britain's very own Salem witch trials. This is now being called the Pendle witch trials. And the bishop settled well with the people of his parish, and one parishioner in particular soon caught his attention. Her name was Alice, a lovely lady aged in her 20s with long strawberry blonde hair and a rather pale looking face. But what made Alice stand out to the bishop was her eyes. They were a hypnotic green, very deep like a lagoon, where you would simply get lost in her gaze. The bishop, delivering his sermon in the pulpit on this Sunday in his place of worship, he started to lose concentration. Even he could feel the hypnotic gaze coming from Alice, even though he didn't stop to stare back. It was just something in his gut that told him her eyes locked on him, just like a heat-seeking missile chasing its target. The older members of the congregation noticed the bishop was anxious because they traced his gaze when he lost track of his message to his parishioners. Noticed that Alice was continually glancing at the bishop. Alice stood out in the congregation as her attire was not something you would wear to church on a Sunday. Two ladies started to give a little cough of discontent and disappointment towards the bishop as they felt she was taking his attention away from the bishop's sermon. Despite this being noticed by the people at the front of the church as he carried on with his sermon. The funny thing was the bishop chose the 10 Commandments for today's sermon, and for some reason the bishop could not remember all of the 10 Commandments, despite knowing them off by heart, as this was his first module while training in St. Joseph's Seminary. The bishop apologized and explained it was because he was nervous, as this was his first sermon after passing out as a newly trained priest. He looked down at his sermon and struggled to find what he was up to, and out of nowhere, the two women who had coughed moments earlier to express their irritation suddenly started to cough again. Only this time they both seemed to be having some sort of coughing episode and could not catch their breath. They stood up in distress and started to turn blue in the face. Two other parishioners went over to the woman's aid and took them out into the fresh air, where they soon recovered. That evening the bishop had a strange, realistic dream. He was dreaming that he was getting very passionate and very close to Alice, and as he woke he felt as if her lips were still pressing against his mouth. Although this was only a dream, it felt as real as if she was in the room with him. Even her smell was as if she'd just been there with him as it lingered in the room. The bishop seemed to become infatuated with Alice, but she seemed to have little interest in him. The bishop he described it as being hypnotised, and he was not in control of himself. Many months afterwards, Alice's aunt, who was a Romany woman, had sadly passed away. Alice had her auntie's remains placed in an open coffin at her home so that her family and friends could pay their last respects. The bishop had arranged a floral arrangement and decided that he would visit Alice to say that, although he'd not known her aunt, he was sure she'd been a lovely woman. This was just an excuse, of course, as he wanted to get acquainted with Alice. The bishop took a drive over to Alice's house, and this was some time after tea. The bishop brought a big bouquet of flowers, and he slowly walked up the path to the house, muttering to himself about what words he could use so he didn't look like a bumbling buffoon. He slowly creeped towards the door, but what the bishop was about to witness would soon chill him to his bones for the rest of his life. With the quaint light of the fire lit inside Alice's house, the bishop could see Alice as the room was illuminated with the glowing fire and the darkness outside and the countryside. Alice, to the bishop's surprise, was completely naked. And this was the first time he'd seen a naked woman, and not just any woman, the woman who had caused the bishop to question his choice of becoming a man of the cloth. As a man of the cloth, he tried so hard to resist the urge to keep moving forward. He could not resist such temptation. He continued to walk up to the window with his heart thudding in his chest. He bent down and peeped through the little window panes. With a small gap in the curtains, he was able to clearly see the sight of Alice as she was dancing around the fire like a madwoman possessed. He noticed the coffin of her aunt behind Alice on a stand. The woman had her arms crossed over her chest, as most people are positioned in this way to symbolize that the recent dearly departed was at peace. The bishop backed away from the window. He was afraid, yet he was unable to take his eyes off the women who had made him question if the life of a priest was for him. He prayed and he apologized to God. After he prayed for strength, he opened one eye and peeped back through the window. To his surprise, another girl there with Alice and her aunt in a coffin. She was also naked. He looked up towards heaven and said to God, "Really? You showed me Alice who had somehow hypnotized me, and now you double it with another woman in the nip. Come on." She was also dancing about naked, and the bishop thought he could hear a singing voice coming from somewhere within the house, like a chant. Then he saw something that truly chilled him, and it sent him running from the house as fast as he could. Alice's dearly departed aunt's body had become animated. The Romany woman's arms slowly uncrossed as if the woman continued their manic, trance-like dance. The bishop had dropped the floral tribute and legged it off into the evening, with any romantic thoughts had now been banished from the bishop's guilty conscience. The funeral took place later that week, but as the bishop was conducting the service, he wondered if Alice's aunt was actually in the coffin. As he now realized that Alice's Romany aunt and the other naked women who he'd witnessed doing this strange dance in the dark that evening, his gut was telling him that they must be part of a witch's coven or something more sinister. The bishop talked about his crazy story with his superiors, about these experiences with the dancing naked ladies, but they refused to believe him. The irony of this being brushed off as a lie or something conjured up in an eccentric mind of the bishop, as the God they worshipped had dedicated their life to serving, is real. So why does this strange account seem far-fetched to his superiors? After all, God sent his son Jesus to the Virgin Mary, who gave birth to Jesus, who is the Son of God, who was killed and resurrected at Easter time. This strange story could have gone two ways. He could have left and lived a life of ignorance and bliss, but thankfully this reinforced the bishop's faith in God, and he treated it as a test and a learning experience. Now, I don't believe that all witches are in line with the devil. I believe that some are just special and other powers lost through time of nature and the ability to control the elements. I should add to this strange tale that the witch who is called Alice, for those of you that know the Pendle witches, known that Alice Nutter was said to be a witch, where it remains still to this day at Pendle Hill. Is Alice, in this Alice, the reanimated version who was put to death hundreds of years before? We'll never know. Hope you enjoyed today's story, and if you ever get a chance, go take a visit to Pendle Hill and experience this for yourselves. Take care.